Okay, I want to talk to you today about pardons. Our president has pardoned, well, he's commuted the sentences of 1,500 people, and he's pardoned a number of people. I don't know how many. I didn't bother looking up the exact number. Some of them pretty bad people. Some of them were killers. I don't know why he pardoned these people. Many years ago, some of you don't know this, but some of you probably do, but for about 8 years, I used to go weekly into Auburn Prison and work with the inmates. Now I'm on the other side of it. I'm working with the police officers now. But in those days, I went in every week, and there was this one guy in the class who he came every week. And so I knew he was more serious about God than others, because in Auburn, they would lock down A and B one week, and they'd lock down C and D the next week. And so if you were on this side, you could be in the yard every other week. And the people that came to the class every week meant that they gave up their yard time in order to be in the class. So I could tell there were a lot of people that every other week, but there were a few that came every week. There was this one guy, I believe his name was Hernandez. I really can't remember. And I won't say his first name because there's 10 million Hernandezes and you'll never know which one it was. But, sometimes the inmates tell you something about the other inmates. And one inmate said to me, he goes, he killed a little girl and raped her. So I knew this about him. And then one day he came up to me and he said, well, I've been through the system and I've been through all my appeals are exhausted. And now the Lord has told me that the governor is going to pardon me. And I thought to myself, there is no way in hell that the governor is going to pardon you for what you did. No way. I'm thinking that. I didn't say that to him, but I'm thinking that. And I'll bet you that he is in the system somewhere even to this day. I doubt he's still in Auburn. They move him around a lot. But he was waiting for a pardon. So I want to talk to you about a pardon and a few other things today, because it's, what about these people that last year, today's the 5th of January, and if you turn the news on, it's January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, the rebellion, the MAGA people who broke into the Capitol, and, all these different people went to prison, and I don't think any of those got pardoned, but I'm wondering if maybe some of them will be pardoned after the 20th of January. I don't know, but I want to talk to you about the concept of pardon. So, from the beginning. Our passage today is from chapter 23, verse 1. Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. Now, the scripture that we looked at last week, Jesus is arrested in the middle of the night by the Jewish priests, and in the morning, they brought Jesus to the full council. There were 70 people. It was called the Sanhedrin. They brought him before the Sanhedrin, the rulers of the Jews, and they asked him, "Are you the Christ?" And he did not answer them, but he said, you said it." He didn't claim to be in overt terms to be the Christ, but he did say, in the future you'll see the Son of Man, coming and going from heaven, which is a reference to Daniel chapter 7, verse 14, where Daniel saw the one like the Son of Man going up to heaven and being presented to God and given a kingdom which is an everlasting kingdom that will never be destroyed. And so they understood that Jesus, referring to that he was that one who was going to be lifted up into heaven, that makes him a person who is actually claiming to be the Messiah. So in the morning, the assembly, these 70 plus the other people who were there, they decided to bring Jesus before Pilate. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but when we say the Apostles' Creed, Pilate is the only other name mentioned in the Apostles' Creed other than the name of Jesus. Suffered under Pontius Pilate, died, crucified, died, and was buried. So Pilate he was from Pontius, I believe. His name was Pontius Pilate, and Pontus was a city. He obviously is a Roman citizen. Pilate was in charge of the Jewish nation between the year 26 and 36. So this is right in the middle of the time that Pilate is in charge of the Jewish nation. And the reason that Pilate was in charge is that they needed somebody who was pretty stiff, and Herod's, we'll talk about the different Herods, but there was a different Herod that is not mentioned in the New Testament. He couldn't control the people, and so they deposed this other Herod. There's Herod the Great. He was the Herod when Jesus was born, and then there are other Herods. There's Herod that we talked about who beheaded John the Baptist, and then this brother of Herod was deposed by Pilate because Herod could not control the place, and so they brought in this hard-nosed Pilate to take care of seeing to it that there are no more rebellions among the Jews. Next slide. Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And once again, Jesus says, "You said it. You say it." Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "What are you doing? This guy hasn't done anything. I don't find any basis for these accusations. Why'd you bring this guy to me? He hasn't done anything." Now, the interesting thing about this is it's apparent that Pilate doesn't even know who Jesus is. Because we'll see in a couple verses, he doesn't know anything about him. He doesn't know that he came from Galilee. And so he sees, well, let's just look at what the accusations are. But before we do that, on the next slide, they found in 1960 this, what's now called the Pilate Stone. And this Tiberian by Pontius Pilate, the Prefect of Judea, has built. And that's in Latin. And so he put up this structure that said this is a monument to Tiberius, who is the Caesar at the time of Christ, and he put up this monument to the Caesar and put his name on it. And that was disappeared in the ground until 1960, and they were doing some excavations, and they got it up out of the earth. They said, "Wow, Pilate really was a guy named Pilate. There really was this person, and he really did live during the time of Tiberius." So no extra charge for that. Next slide. The assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him. "We found this man perverting our nation." What does this mean? It means he's teaching a false teaching. He's saying that it's okay on the Sabbath day to eat grains of wheat as you walk through the field. He's saying that it's not just an overt adultery, but when the lust is inside of a person that leads to the adultery, the sin is inside and it manifests outside. He's saying things about the leadership that are not flattering at all. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor. Did Jesus forbid to pay taxes? They brought the denarius to Jesus and they said, "Should we pay?" And he said, whose picture is on it? And they said, "Caesar's." And he said, "Well, give what belongs to Caesar, and give what belongs to God. Give what belongs to God to God." He never said they shouldn't pay taxes. In fact, he said, if the Roman soldier forces you to go a mile, which was within their rights, the law said that they could come in, the soldier could make any kid or any man in the area make them carry his baggage, his military gear, for a mile. And Jesus said, if anybody makes you go a mile, go 2 miles. He was not a rebellious person, even though he didn't have too much use for Caesar, but you can't find Jesus criticizing Caesar. You don't find Jesus criticizing Pilate. You do find Jesus severely criticizing Herod. So, perverting the nation, there was nothing new in the teaching of Jesus. This is what people don't understand. There's nothing new in the baptism. Jews had been baptizing people when they sinned. They had been doing it for hundreds and thousands of years. There was nothing new in that. What was fairly new is they were living under a different world situation, and they were being taxed and irritated by the Roman government, and they didn't want to pay the tax. You know how much the tax was? 1 day's wage. Think about all the taxes that we have to pay. We don't even see the tax. They take the taxes out of our paycheck. They don't here, but to pay my own taxes. But in most places where you have a job, they take the taxes right out. You don't even see it. So you don't realize that you're paying 38% there, and then when you own a house, that you're paying thousands of dollars every year for property tax, and when you go to the store, you're paying 7.5% sales tax. I mean, it's really, really oppressive, but we're used to it. They said Jesus is forbidding us. Could Jesus forbid anybody to do anything? He was in no power place where he could forbid people to pay taxes. It's ridiculous that this charge was brought. He was just an ordinary guy from Galilee who is a Bible teacher. And C, saying that he himself is a Messiah, a king. Those are the 3 accusations. None of those are true. He didn't do any of those things. Next slide. But they were insistent. He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he began, even to this place. Now, as looking at this passage, unfortunately I don't have the ability to point today. But if you look up in the corner there, you see some little blue. That's Galilee, and Jesus was up in that area. And if you look at the story of Jesus, as we've been talking about it for the last 2 years, basically everything that Jesus did was on the east side of Judea and on the east side of Galilee. You don't find Jesus in Hebron, which was where King David was. You don't really find him after his birth in Bethlehem. There are no stories recorded that Jesus was in Gaza. He was in Samaria at one time. He talked with a Samaritan woman. So he didn't actually, this wasn't actually true that he was every single place in Judea. He was mainly in the Jordan Valley. And they said he's stirring up people. What he was doing was pointing out the hypocrisy of the religion at that time, the Jewish religion at that time. You know, they had their little laws. Well, you can't travel on the Sabbath, but you can go 15 feet. They had this idea, the law says this, but we're going to put a fence around the law, which is outside of the law, and so you can't even go beyond that fence before you get to the law. So you won't break the law. And so they had all of these rules on how you had to wash your hands. There's really very few laws about washing. It says if you sin, then you go and you get a baptism, you wash yourself, you give your offering to the priest, he prays for you, and then you're forgiven. And so they said, well, if the priest has to wash before, by the way, I do wash before I come to church. I take a shower before I come to church. And I think that's a really good idea, don't you? Yes. Thank you. I don't think you'll smell body odor on me on Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon, you might. But the priest had to wash. And so what they said, well, if the priest has to wash, then everybody has to wash. You know, they added this thing around the law. And Jesus came along and he said, all of those things are ridiculous, and that's not the intent initially. Yes, the priests are supposed to wash. It doesn't mean that you can't come into the house of God if you haven't had a bath that day. And so he is really coming at the hypocrisy. And I want to mention here, you know, throughout history, people have called Jews the Christ killers. You know, there's a similar thing going on right now. You know, there's a lot of anti-Semitism right now, and there are people that are saying we have to give reparations to the black people. You know, the Bible speaks to this. I don't know if you knew that. It says, a son should not be put to death for the sins of the father, and the father should not be put to death for the sins of the son. And so what somebody else did at some other time does not reflect on us. And modern-day Jews are not Christ killers. And if you want to look at this passage clearly, you'll see that for the most part, it's Rome that killed Jesus. Pilate is a Roman guy. He's submitted to the Roman Caesar. And when they come in a few verses here, they say, you're no friend of Caesar if you let this guy go. So it's really, I don't care what kind of politics you're talking about. When somebody comes against the politic of the day, there's going to be problems. And these priests were appointed by the Romans. They were not elected by the Jewish populace. They were appointed by the Romans so that they could control. And as I've said many times, the politics always wants to control the church, always wants to control religion, because they in America, they want our vote. And so they say the things that we want to hear. And so Pilate is told that this guy has been teaching here all through Judea, which wasn't true. He was on the east side, as far as Jerusalem, which is a little bit north of the Dead Sea there. You can't see that very good. And he's caused all kinds of problems, and he's telling people not to pay their taxes. He's telling people not to obey us, and we think he should be arrested. And so Pilate says, I can pass the buck here. Is this guy from Galilee? Yes. Well, Galilee wasn't Pilate's jurisdiction. And it's Passover time, so every so-called observant Jew was in Jerusalem for this week-long holiday. And, you know, the politicians always have to show up at major events. Am I right? Don't the politics show up whenever we do anything around here? The politicians, they show up because there's something going on Memorial Day or whatever it is. And so Herod, who was in charge, the brother of the one who Pilate had deposed in Judea, his brother was in Galilee. He was able to control things better, so he kept his job. And so Pilate figures out that I can pass the buck on this guy because he's a Galilean. Now, Herod doesn't have any jurisdiction in Judea where they are, but he says, okay, I'll send him over there. Next slide. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether he was Galilean, and when he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem. Already said that. Next slide. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. Now, Herod's father is the one who tried to kill all the babies in Bethlehem when he found out the Messiah. And when he called the priests, he said, you Bible scholars, tell me where Messiah will be born. And they went to Micah in the Old Testament, and they found that passage that he'd be born in Bethlehem. And so Herod went, and he had them kill every baby. Sounds like a nice guy, right? Every baby 2 years old and younger. This is the kind of guy his dad was. And this guy is the son. Now, Herod the Great, the one that was in charge when Jesus was born. He had this son who we're talking about now, and he's the one who didn't like John the Baptist. Herod had stolen his brother's wife from his brother, and his niece, who was the daughter of his wife. He took his brother's wife. You know what we call that? Incest. And John the Baptist said to Herod, "It's not lawful for you to have that woman." Now, she was not a nice lady. And so one day, the daughter, Herodias, begins a little dance, and it was probably a lewd dance of some sort. And Herod said to this niece of his, who was his stepdaughter, "Ask what you want, and I'll give it to you up to half the kingdom." And so she goes to her mom and says, "He's offered me whatever I want. What should I ask for?" And the woman said, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And it says Herod was sorry that he had to do that because he thought John was a prophet. But since he gave his word, because he's a very honest person, he went and had John's head cut off and served to the girl on a platter. This is in the Bible. Did you know this? This is the guy we're talking about now. At one point, as we went through Luke many moons ago, Herod tried to get in touch with Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't have anything to do with him. And we talked about the palace, the great palace that Herod lived in, and where he lived, and what he was doing. And in the past, he's trying to get with Jesus, and Jesus won't give him the time of day. Go tell that fox. Jesus wanted nothing to do with him. So now he's coming up against not only Pilate, but he's coming up against this guy that killed his cousin, John the Baptist. It had to be pretty scary, don't you think? And when Herod saw him, he was glad. He had been wanting to see him for a long time. He was hoping to see him and perform some sign. He wanted, okay, Jesus, prove yourself to me by doing this or that. He doesn't want to know about what the teaching of Jesus is. He doesn't know why he needs to change his life to stop doing the things that he's doing. He wants to see a miracle for a miracle's sake, and Jesus never, ever would do that. A lot of people wanted him to do that. Prove this, prove that. Jesus would never do it. When he would see somebody that God told him to heal, he would heal them. But when somebody came up and said, "We want to see a sign," he never did it. And so Herod is thinking, hey, this guy's pretty popular in my area. It'd be good if I knew who he was. But Jesus gave him no answer. I don't know about you, but I have issues with certain people. Not too many. And so when I'm in my bed at night, I'm thinking, what am I going to do if I see this or that person? And I think to myself, if I say this, they're not going to accept it. And if I say this, they're not going to accept it. And so I come to the conclusion that if I meet that particular person at and I probably will sometime because they live around here, I'm going to have to say nothing. Because no matter what I say, it's not going to be accepted. And no matter what I say, if I say something, they're going to say, "Well, he said this." Or if I say this, they're going to say, "Well, he said this." So I'm going to have to be quiet. And I think that's what's going on with Jesus. Herod had all kinds of questions for Jesus that he examined him pretty thoroughly, and Jesus would not answer him. He gave no answer. Now, here's a nice little picture of Herodias with John's head. Next slide. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. When you go to a Catholic church or an Episcopal church or an Orthodox church, they don't have a cross like that. They got a cross with Jesus hanging on it with the nails in his hands and his feet. Why is that? Why don't we have that? And why don't they have this? It's a choice. But in order for the cross to be empty, it has to be full first. And we're supposed to contemplate the death of the Lord. The scriptures tell us, Paul tells us to think about the death of the Lord. I have here some things that Jesus said to the religious leaders. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. You know, these things, I love the Contigo. But to spray it out, we don't have a dishwasher. We're in the old era where you wash your dishes by hand. And no matter how much I spray inside this cap, it gets filled with gunk. So I have to spray it with the water, and then I have to take it out to the garage where I have a pump to pump up the tires on my car, and I have to blow it out with air. And when I bring it back in and clean it out again, and there's still crap in there, I have to take it back out. Because if I don't, I will die, because there's all kinds of crap in there. And Jesus said, you wash the outside of the cup, but you don't clean the inside. You look pretty, you've got your good clothes on, you've bathed before you come into the temple, you've washed your hands at the proper time, you haven't turned a light on the Sabbath day. But inside, greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, clean the inside of the cup so that the outside may become clean. Woe, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you're like whitewashed tombs on which the outside look beautiful, but inside they're full of the bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. I thought Jesus said, oh, don't judge me, don't judge anybody. Jesus is judging them. I don't judge you. The scriptures judge you. The words of Jesus judge you. If you don't clean the inside out, then it's going to be a problem. And these people are standing there accusing Jesus of doing the things that they themselves would do. Vehemently. You've got to do something about this guy. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. Who put the elegant robe on him? Herod did. One time I come from a very legalistic background of Christianity where at the time that I went to Bible school, the girls still had to wear dresses to class. And there was a whole rule book, like, number one, that you'd be thrown out of college for ever taking a drink. You'd be thrown out of college for ever smoking a cigarette. You'd be thrown out of college for going to a pool hall. If you wanted to swim, I went in Florida, so there's always time to go swim. The girls will swim over here. The boys will swim at this place. All kinds of, when you go to the meeting, you will wear a tie. No, none of that stuff is scriptural stuff, and I reject all of that. You know me, I hardly ever wear a tie. But this guy was taking this passage, he was preaching, and he said, well, Jesus wore a really good robe, and so therefore we should always wear a suit jacket and tie. This is, to be like Jesus, you have to dress. I mean, dress for success is a thing, but on the other hand, it has nothing to do with spirituality. It has to do with how you present yourself. And so we see that Jesus did not have a kingly robe, a seamless robe. He had ordinary clothes, and Herod decided to mock him because Pilate had sent Jesus to him and said, he says he's the king of the Jews. You're the king of the Jews. What do you want to do to this guy? And so they disrespected him, and Herod got somebody from his entourage and said, get a kingly robe out for this guy. And Herod put his own robe on Jesus and sent him back to Pilate. Eventually when they did crucify Jesus, Pilate put on the top of the cross, the King of the Jews, and the other said, no, right on there that he said, I'm the King of the Jews. And Pilate said, what I've written, I've written. He was crucified as King of the Jews. Completely disrespected. So the seamless robe is the ordinary clothing for the King of the Jews, for Herod. Remember when his father, the wise men came and said, where's he who's born King of the Jews? And Herod, his father, was really upset, like, hey, that's my job, and I don't want to give it to anybody else, so we got to get rid of this new King of the Jews. Where's he born? And so the son said, here, put my clothes on him and send him back to Pilate. They should be funny. Now, this action by Herod caused the prophecy concerning the crucifixion of Jesus. Actually, the whole psalm is about, I didn't want to read the whole psalm to you today, but I wanted to just mention that the fact that Jesus had a seamless robe was prophesied 1,000 years before Jesus was born. And this whole psalm, this is the, my God, why have thou forsaken me? This is what Jesus quoted when they nailed him to the cross. He quoted Psalm 22, verse 16. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. You remember the story? They stripped him naked, and he had this beautiful garment with no seams. How do you weave a garment with no seams? It had to be really high quality. But you, O Lord, be not far off. You are my help. Hasten to my assistance. Deliver my soul from the sword. Look at the different metaphors here. Deliver my soul from the sword, from the power of the dog, from the lion's mouth, from the horns of the wild oxen. You answer me. I will tell you your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you. And so David had written this 1,000 years before Jesus was born, and all of the things about the crucifixion of Jesus were foretold in this and also in the book of Isaiah, chapter number 53. Now look at this. Look at this irony. Next slide. The same day Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they'd been enemies. A little parentheses. So I have to ask myself, why did they become friends that day? Pilate had replaced his brother. We know this from Josephus and from other things that were written about that time. There's a lot of things written about the first century in Jerusalem because they were literate people, and they left us their records. His brother had been deposed by Pilate. And so therefore, there had to be some bad blood. But the fact that Pilate sent Jesus to Herod, in Herod's mind, was, oh, now he's going to respect me. He's going to honor my place in the kingdom. So therefore, he sent this man to me. And so Pilate and Herod became friends. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that nice? It's always good. You know, it says in Proverbs, it's easier to win a walled city than to gain a friend who's been offended. Something like that. That's a loose paraphrase. Next slide. And Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people. He said, "You brought me this man as one who's perverting the people. I've examined him. I have not found this man guilty of any of your charges, and neither has Herod. He sent him back to us. Indeed, he's done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will flog him." Now, that doesn't sound fair, does it? That's the kind of guy Pilate was. Well, they're mad. They're upset with him, and so I have the power. You know, there's no such thing as a jury of 12 or anything like that going on. There's no judge that can hear both sides. Or I'll just beat the guy and let him go. And they said, "No." It's not enough. Next slide. It says, now I want to just mention this. See how this is in double brackets? If we got Gerald Ford there, yeah, good. Double brackets. Verse 17. If you have a Bible that has a 17 but no verse on it. Anybody got that? It's there? It's in parentheses. Well, the New Revised Standard has just the number 17 and nothing after it. All three other Gospels say he was obligated to pardon somebody. He was obligated to release. And so this is from the New American Standard. In this way, he was obliged to release to them at the feast one prisoner. Now, Jimmy Carter just died. When Gerald Ford became president, this shows you how old I am. The first presidential election that I voted in was 1976, and somebody convinced me to vote for Jimmy Carter because he was a Christian. And I have no doubt that he was a Christian. His life showed he was a Christian. However, he was ineffective as a president. But before him, Gerald Ford had become president because Nixon had done some illegal things, which are, compared to some of the recent illegal things that have happened, are kind of light. But Nixon had to resign. He turned the government of the United States over to Gerald Ford, who was his vice president, who was not elected with him. His vice president had been ousted from office because of some bad dealings, and so we had ourselves the first unappointed president of the United States ever. Did you know that, you young people? And so Gerald Ford was running against Jimmy Carter in 1976, and President Ford issued a pardon for Richard Nixon. And it stopped the whole Watergate thing. That was the end of it. And historians say that the fact that he pardoned Nixon caused him to not be elected and for Jimmy Carter to win the election. Would you agree with that kind of thinking? Yeah, Priscilla's shaking her head. Nobody else is admitting to being old here. But she and I are basically the same age, so we remember this stuff. Yeah, Crystal remembers too. So the people were upset with Gerald Ford because he pardoned this criminal. Rotten person Nixon, he doesn't deserve. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Let Let me not say the rest of that sentence. I guess I said it. Willie Hernandez. I'm praying that the governor of New York will give me a pardon. He's a criminal. He's in jail. What's he going to do, sue me? How many Willie Hernandezes are there? I guess I'm not too worried about that. I'm waiting for the governor to give me a pardon. But it came. I can't see any governor pardoning somebody who did a crime like that. However, our current president has pardoned some killers. And I'm sure that they were there praying, maybe the president will pardon me. It's my only hope. Well, one day they came in and said, by the way, you're free to go. Can you imagine? People are really upset about this because did President Biden really understand who he was pardoning? Somebody else must have made this decision because he never would have let that guy go. If he had his mind about it. Do you read the news? You know, I read all this stuff and it kind of drives me crazy sometimes. Who deserves the pardon? I'll tell you what happens next week. Who deserves the pardon? Of course, I deserve the pardon because, Jesus loves me. So therefore, I deserve the pardon. And, Sean, she deserves, she's messed up sometimes too. She deserves the pardon. We're believers. We deserve the pardon. Any comments?